We have a 2017 Artic Alterra 500. I'm not sure if it's a TVR model or not. It may be a TVR. The few things that I wanted to add, there's a few videos out there, but they don't go over a few things in detail, so I wanted to add a few things. A lot of this you can find in the manual, but I'll cover a few things that are in the manual as well. You can see I have it tore down. I have the valve cover off. The manual goes over a few times this little keeper goes in this groove right here. It goes up under the cam to keep the cam from moving around too much. It slides in that slot down there underneath the cam once you put the chain on. One problem I had with this machine, they claim it's 300 hours, but somehow I don't know if they didn't change the oil or if somebody changed the odometer and it has more miles on it. It was smoking, and a kid tried to figure out why it was smoking by checking the timing. He took the tensioner out to check the timing, rotated it backwards, jumped some teeth on the cam, and bent the valves. So I got it in that situation where it was smoking, had bent valves, wouldn't start. It turns out that part of the reason he was able to do that by accident so easily was the chain was stretched. Now, if you see this chain, I've put it halfway on. This is a new chain. This is as close to on as you can put a new chain. It will not go over that pulley, that gear. The manual says take the gear off. I've seen videos, guys take the gear off. When I did this the first time, this is for guys that want to do it once and do it right. When I did this the first time, I was able to slide the chain right off and right back on without removing the gear. The original chain had stretched so much that the timing marks over here would not line up. A lot of stuff in the manual you'll see real easy. You got your top dead center down here. There's a little line. If I can get a light down there for you, I'll show you. There's a little line in there. I guess you can't really see it, but it's in there. There's a line. You take the covers off. You rotate it around until the line shows up. Yep, there you go. You almost saw it there for a second. There, where is it at? Hard to get some light in there. There's that line. You can almost see it there. Yeah, there's a little line on the flywheel, whatever that's called, stator, whatever, and it lines up with the mark right there. And then on your cam, with your lobes down, again, the book goes through that pretty well. Online, it did not say that in a few spots. You want your lobes down. So you're going to be on compression stroke. Your piston's going to be at the top. I don't know if you can see it in there. It's hard to see, but it's in there. It's at the top. There it is. And you want your lobes down. So the cam lobes, those are what push your lifters up and down to move your rocker arms and move your valves. You want your lobes down, and you want these two marks. Now there's a few videos out there that show this. These two marks to be flat with the top of the head. See, I'm off. I'm not there yet. My chain's not on. Obviously, remember I was telling you. Now, the chain that I had was stretched so much that I could take it off without removing the gear, and I was able to set the timing one tooth forward or one tooth backwards and never have the actual timing marks line up. That's about where it would line up, whether I was one tooth forward or one tooth backwards. It was always off about a half a tooth. And the problem what we had with that, with it was running, is at first when we first put it back together, it did some pre-ignition type of stuff. Sounded kind of weird, like the engine was trying to spit backwards once in a while against itself. And then I think it jumped a tooth while I had it running like that, and then it started running different. What would happen was it'd run fine until it got hot, but once it got hot, I could hear the exhaust valves actually tapping the piston. And I don't think it was a matter of clearance. My valve lash clearance was around 8 to 12, 8 to 11. The book says 7 to 10, 7 to 8. The older model, some of them said 8 to 11 for your valve clearance, your valve lash on your exhaust side. intake side right here is supposed to be 3 to 6, 3 to 5. I've seen 2 to 4. Different years had slightly different specs. I believe the book has it in there on this one as 3 to 5 on the intake, and then 6 to 8 or something like that on the exhaust. I believe that's what the manual says. You can find the manual online pretty easy. It is free as PDF. I downloaded it somewhere. I just Googled that, was able to find that. In order to change the timing chain, you do have to split this case. It's not that bad a deal. There's only about 20 bolts that hold this on. My oil pump is another thing. So you see this chain's ready to go back on. That oil was pretty dirty on this machine. I doubt it had 300 miles on it. I'm thinking more like 4,000 miles. I think somebody ran the piss out of this. Either that or they never changed the oil ever, and they just left it running. Maybe they went camping and they needed the heat, so they just left it running for like the whole weekend when they went camping or hunting. Maybe that would make sense. 300 miles, but they just left it running for like 20 hours straight when they were camping, so they could, or hunting, so they'd have some heat. Now this is the oil pump here. So you'll see I've already taken off the gear. It looks good inside. It's a healthy pump. There's no damage back here. There's no damage to the drive gear. It has some different name, right? But what I noticed was, and I'll try to stick that back on there for the time being. What I noticed was the gear I had a lot of play. If you put that on there, it's actually there's a lot of play in that gear. Stupid light. I should just strap it to my head. So this gear actually moved around a lot. It was wobbling like this, and now pretty much like that almost. And now the thing is, they're made that way. So I ordered the new pump and the new gear. It's in my truck, and they're made with about 5 thousandths of as standard 5.005 clearance on the shaft to the gear. So it'll move back and forth like that, and I suppose that's just how it's made. I ordered the new one, and it's about the same. Some of that's because the pump's loose, but it moves about that much even with the pump tightened down, because there's space between the drive shaft and the actual gear itself. Some of these, I've heard that these teeth wear off. That may be why. Maybe that gear walks back and forth enough to wear the teeth down. The new pump, the only difference was the teeth are hardened. You can tell somebody took a torch and they hardened those teeth on the new pump, the new gear. So I got a new pump and gear. It probably didn't even need it. It's just made that way. It's kind of a crappy design. I would think they would want that to almost be a tight slip fit, or if anything, it would be better to have that as a press fit so it can't ever chatter and walk around while it's running. I would think that flopping around like that could cause some chatter, especially with the gap between those gears and that thing walking around. I know a lot of these have weird noise down here, and that might be the noise. It might not be the clutch. They say it's the variators. They say it's the clutch. They say it's the secondary clutch. They say it's, there's a lot of people saying that it's just a noise you can't get away with. Some people say it's the timing chain, and maybe the timing chain might have been smacking around on this one because it was so loose, but a lot of the noise might have been that gear because it has all that play in it, and with it wobbling and wiggling around, it might have like a clattering, clinking. At idle, when you get going and moving, the thing was pretty quiet, but you sit there and idle, and it had like chattery, clinking coming from this area. I took the clutch cover off and with the outer cover over there and run it, and all the noise was gone. And by the way, if you do that, there's an oil seal. So this is the inner clutch drum for the wet clutch, and that's pretty normal. I was looking at some, and I guess they all have grooves in them after a certain amount of miles. That's pretty normal. But this piece right here will pop out. I guess that's what seals the oil in there. And the pulleys here hold that in. And so when I started that up, that actually popped out and oil started running out. Just a FYI, so you don't make the mistake that I did. But I was able to determine in that amount of time that there was no noise at all coming from the variators or anything to do with the clutch. And on another note, these variators look extremely worn, and they were still really quiet. So I keep buying new variators every time I get into these because people say they're noisy, and I couldn't tell any noise at all coming from these, and they look extremely worn. My other machine I worked on had 4,400 miles on it, and they did not even look that bad. So for this to have 300 miles on it, something's not adding up. This belt at, I don't know, it could be, I don't know, maybe somebody rode it hard. I did notice for somebody picking these up used, there was a bunch of sand down here in the bottom of the airbox. So I cleaned all that out. That was completely full of sand. I can't imagine how sand got in there unless one of these intake tubes came loose. If you got one of these Alterras, these intake tubes do not look like they're connected the best. Even with the clamps all the way tight, some of the clamps don't clamp down tight enough. And then that upper piece of the intake tube way up in there is missing too on the other side of the airbox. So it's another problem that you could run into and end up sucking in water way before you should. When this guy ran this with the teeth off, off time, it bent the intake valves. It hit the exhaust valves, but it did not bend the exhaust valves. So just a FYI, if you ever run one of these and the timing chain jumps, you may only have to replace the intake valves. Now, also keep in mind that, like with this machine, I did notice some chatter, and it could very well be that those exhaust valves were sealing up good, but they may be just bent enough to cause a little bit of chatter when they're closing, if they're not closing and seating flat. And that may be why I had a little bit of chatter, but I'm assuming that some of that chatter was simply because, or most of that was simply because the timing chain was so stretched that it was off half a tooth, and that was letting the valves chatter around at the wrong time, opening and closing when there's no compression to hold them tight, and is allowing them to kind of chatter around. So I'm going to know here shortly, because this is the new chain, and it will not go on no matter what I do. I mean, maybe I could turn the engine over with it like that, like you do a bicycle chain, but being that it's a timing chain, I don't want to stretch the chain. So I'm going to go ahead and follow the book procedure, take the gear off, put the gear back on, put the Loctite on the bolts and torque them back down, and then put that key back in. Remember the little keeper that goes in here, and then go from there. Anytime you take these valve covers off, you have to adjust the valves. The rockers are part of the valve cover assembly, which I put around here. Here it is, right here. The valve rockers and lifters, are rocker arms, whatever you want to call them. I guess there's no lifters, are part of the valve cover assembly. So anytime you take that off, you do need to readjust the valves. I've heard a few guys say that they had the valve cover off, but they didn't think they needed to readjust the valves. Anytime you're talking 3 thousandths, 003 in standard, and that is literally a thick hair. I mean, that's one hair. One hair is between 2 and 6 thousandths. A piece of paper is about 2 thousandths thick. You can imagine when you're sealing this up with silicone, there's no gasket for it, so you got to silicone that up, and the silicone can easily equal a few hairs thick, and that's going to mess up your valve lash, or what they call valve clearance. And so that's going to need to be adjusted pretty much every time. I would recommend torquing those nuts every time. I think it's 8 foot-pounds. 8 foot-pounds on pretty much everything on the valve cover is 8 foot-pounds. All of these big nuts that go on your clutch assembly, inner and outer clutch assembly, wet clutch, all that is 140 foot-pounds. They require red Loctite. Your screws in here all require blue Loctite. And let's see, your cam gear bolts, they require red Loctite, and I believe they might even be 8 foot-pounds as well. They like their 8 foot-pounds on a lot of this stuff. The book will also tell you to keep track of all of these. You don't want to lose any of these down in there, because that'll get in the gears in the engine and you'll have trouble. You won't be very happy. So make sure when you take this cover off, you keep track of those. Make sure you put them back. Same thing with that pin that drives your oil pump. You don't want to forget to put that pin in. The book says use a new snap ring. The snap ring's back ordered. So I believe I have it right here in this pile somewhere. I'm going to throw the snap ring back on there. I did not have to damage the snap ring at all taking it off. It came off very easy. I didn't have to stretch it very far. I can't see any reason not to reuse it. especially being I did order a new one, but it's on back order. So we'll put all this back together with everything but a new snap ring. Try to clean that dirty oil out the bottom. I may take that strainer plate out just to clean that out good and make sure that there's no debris down in there. Somebody ran this pretty hard. If it is 300 miles, somebody ran it really hard for 300 miles and didn't change the oil for a very long amount of time, because it has the same wear as my other unit, which has 4,000 miles on it. That unit also has the valve chatter when it gets hot. When that unit gets hot, I can hear the exhaust valve start to tap. Now maybe they're tapping the piston, maybe it's something else, but I'm thinking that these chains, I believe they're only 200-hour chains. They're only supposed to last like 200 hours, something like that. And a lot of that other unit's got about 4,000 miles on it. I'm not sure how many hours that is, but it's got the same situation where it sounds like it's tapping, and that could be a precursor to a chain that's getting ready to jump teeth, just to let you guys know. Yep. So good luck.